Okay. Hello, everyone. I am clearly not Steele Stillman, but I am taking over for Steele Stillman in the lecture series. Today we have Clement Valla. Clement's background, he has a bachelor's in architecture from Columbia, and he has his master's in digital media from RISD. He's a pretty multidisciplinary approached artist, that makes no sense, but you get what I'm saying. Artist. His work has been shown a variety of places, Indianapolis Museum of Art, Bitforms, the DAP Galleries, which I went to undergrad, incidentally.
Really? Oh, nice.
His work's also been written about quite a bit, mostly in talking about its relationship to the internet and form and algorithmic creation of images, which he'll get into as he goes along. So let's go ahead and welcome him. Thank you.
Thank you. So we'll get back to this. I thought it'd be more fun to have like a more maybe informal lecture, especially since you're all dealing with this stuff on your own. So feel free to interrupt me at any time. I'm actually starting with the last thing I did, and I'm not even sure what it is yet, which happens a lot, but we'll come back to it. But yeah, just kind of remember this, and then I'll throw it back on the screen at the end. It'll hopefully make a little more sense. I'm basically, so to get to where I'm at right now, I'm just going to give a little background to some of my previous work, and then hopefully we can have sort of a more interesting conversation about what I'm trying to figure out these days. What I'm particularly interested in might be called scripted images or algorithmic images, and it's just this funny realization that the amount of images sort of being generated or being archived today kind of dwarfs things like the Library of Congress. I'm sure you've all seen these graphs of like how many images Instagram has versus how many images the Library of Congress has. And this kind of really simple realization struck me that even beyond sort of Instagram and Facebook, there's sort of hundreds of thousands of images being generated algorithmically and automatically all the time, every day. And I think that's a sort of very interesting condition to kind of poke at. So what kind of things? Well, if you think of like satellite photography, things like Google Maps, Nokia Maps, Google Street View, license plate readers. There are cars that drive around the US photographing your license plate, and then they sell that information to the police. So all these kinds of surveillance systems, CCTV, and then there's also all kinds of systems that kind of manipulate our photos for us all the time. Has anybody heard of Google Awesome? So Google Awesome is the perfect example. If you are uploading your photos to Google Plus or Google Drive or whatever it is, or if you have an Android phone, it actually goes through all your photos and says, oh, hey, your friend looks really good in that one, and then your friend also looks really good in that one, and I'll put them together so that everybody's like smiling and looks good in the one group shot. So it like automatically manipulates your selfies and creates a moment that doesn't exist, basically, right? So is it really a photograph anymore, or how are we thinking of these things? And so that's kind of what I'm after. I'm interested in images that are not made by human hands, and I kind of find that fascinating. So it all started kind of a while back, and this is maybe the work that I'm best known for. It's called Postcards from Google Earth. And I basically found these really strange moments when the representation created by Google Earth is just, it seems totally weird and crazy to us humans, right? It's very uncanny. And so my first thought was like, yay, awesome, this is a glitch, right? Super cool. But I started thinking about it a little more and realized that actually what's interesting about these images is precisely the fact that they're not glitches, right? That in these moments, the Google Earth, the algorithm is doing exactly what it's meant to be doing, which is taking a photograph and distorting the photograph to match a 3D model. And so these images just became interesting to me because they kind of expose how Google Earth works, right? They sort of point our attention away from the representation and onto the software itself, onto the system that scripts these images. And basically just a little sort of technical information. What's going on is that there's sort of competing inputs. So Google Earth's 3D data set comes from government or topographical mapping companies. And in a traditional map, right, you don't map the ephemeral, and you typically also don't map, say, man-made structures. You try and map what's considered natural. Of course, in photographs, you can't do the same kind of editing that you can in a model or in a map, right? So in a photograph, you actually see the roads, but the roads aren't there in the 3D model. And then you kind of have to start questioning all kinds of assumptions, like, is this berm really natural, or why is it mapped topographically as opposed to the highways, which are artificial? Anyhow, so this is, it's these two competing inputs that kind of don't match up, and these things, kind of look really strange to us humans. But again, of course, yeah, that's Niagara Falls. So yeah, that's Rome. Again, one of these sort of weird assumptions about what's topographical and what's man-made. Yeah, so I kind of view these as again, sort of thinking as artists, like what is the act of creation, and are these things like creative in any way, or how do we begin to approach things that are obviously sort of produce some kind of uncanny, almost physical reaction in the viewer, but are really just kind of spit out by these automated systems. And so it's almost like an archive of a weird sort of typologies, or it's almost, it's not natural, obviously, because they're scripted systems, but it's also not, nobody sat here and went, oh, wouldn't it be great to distort the Campodiolio, I can't pronounce it in Italian. The other sort of big thing with this project is the act of collecting them as JPEGs, right? That's the other thing about scripted systems, is that when you're looking at a representation on Google Earth, you're looking at something that's there because of a whole chain of software and hardware, a very contingent change that actually gets updated constantly and that might break at any time. So we tend to look at them as images, but they're actually more, to me, they're almost more like performances, right? They exist in one place at one time. And then every time you look at one of these images again, they actually have to be recreated by whatever piece of software you're using to look at these images. So radically different idea of what an image is. And so I decided to kind of collect them as postcards, right? Both for like I'm traveling around Google Earth, I'm gonna collect postcards from everywhere I go, and also for the memorializing aspect of these images. So just some other projects. Oh, I forgot to load this one up. I can't see what I'm typing. 3D maps -3d.com. Is that working? Yes. Okay, this might take a minute to load. Do we have the internet? There we go. So that's us. That's where we are right now, or where the IP servers are for here. So what is this? What are we looking at? This is another 3D map of the world. It's Nokia's 3D map of the world. It's called here.com. And the interesting thing about Nokia is that its data is kind of all fairly accessible. And this is what their 3D map looks like if you remove all the 3D information. Right? So what we're actually looking at are images. Nokia has the same cars and the same airplanes that Google does, so it's taking photography all the time. What Nokia also has are computers that take all of these photos and build 3D models automatically from the photos, and then cut up the photos to sort of skin the 3D models to make them look like buildings, etc. So yeah, these are kind of a fascinating, it's almost, we read them maybe as, or I read them at any rate, as sort of disaster scenes or maybe sort of crazy cubist collages. We're probably more over east, right? That actually looks like Midtown. Is that the AT&T? No, Verizon building. Anyhow, so yeah, so basically I built this website that all it really does is expose the way in which these images are collected, sorted, and the kind of textures that are created by these automated algorithms. So going back to here, the other thing The other thing that I sort of like doing in my work is always playing off, things that I find online, how to manifest them in space, how to keep them as, part of the archive or not part of a sort of larger archive. And so with these, what I've been doing is just picking singular tiles, kind of using that online tool, and just picking singular moments that have a kind of aesthetic to them, right? An easily identifiable, new aesthetic or post-internet aesthetic or what have you. But musing on the fact that they're really not generated for any sort of aesthetic purpose at all, actually. They're generated, they're actually not even meant to be seen by humans, which is odd and fascinating at the same time. These are, created in order to store information that Nokia's 3D maps can then take this information and transform it back into a 3D model. So we're now looking at images that not only are not created by humans, but that aren't even meant to be seen by humans. Which really then kind of makes me wonder, well, what is an image in the traditional sense? I mean, that might be sort of a big, large, vague questions, but if we pull out the human communication aspect of an image, then what are we really talking about, right? These are by machines for machines, and I'm just sort of peeling back the lid so that we can see them. These are containers in Newark, very colorful. London. So that's kind of one angle, looking at these very contemporary systems, images being generated or manipulated by computers, so not generated by humans, which sort of also got me thinking back. This is a Bruno Latour quote from the catalog to a show that he partially curated at the ZKM, and it was called "What is Iconoclash?" And so he's talking about a kairopite, which, again, some of these words I just can't have a hard time pronouncing. But they're a traditional class of images, a kairopite, idols, icons, right? All of these images, oftentimes pre-Renaissance images, that actually derive all of their meaning precisely because they weren't created by humans. Or it's like this weird double take. Like, we know humans kind of created an icon, right? But if it's individually authored, if it's somehow creative or original or unique, then it actually doesn't function as an icon, right? That's not its purpose in that image economy. And so I think there's something kind of fascinating to think about the way in which that kind of image economy somehow straddles the line between man-made and not man-made in our conception of images, and starting to think about, okay, well, how is meaning then interjected into those images? It's probably some kind of divine meaning or some invisible sort of force in the images help materialize or explicate that. And so I see the images that I'm pulling out or that I'm collecting in a very similar way, right? They're images that sort of let us give form to these invisible, in this case, technological forces that actually guide a lot of what we see online. So anyway, here's a perfect example of a kairopoetic image. This is the Shroud of Turin, which has the kind of imprint of Jesus on it. And then it also depends on your belief system, right? You might believe that this is actually the imprint of Jesus Christ, in which case it comes from a divine sort of origin. Or you might believe that this is man-made, and yet this thing obviously functions within an economy of images, and we don't sort of attribute it to an author or anything like that, right? I mean, doing that would make it a sham, would make it, we wouldn't sort of go on pilgrimages to go look at this. So that led to, kind of starting to look back at the history of images, and at about the same time, the Met Museum put its whole archive of photography online, which I thought was really great and amazing. So I basically, you're kind of not supposed to do this, but I just wrote a little program to download like thousands and thousands and thousands of images off of their website, given that they're now public images. And in particular, I sort of focused on images that were tagged with like the idea of God or icons. And I should mention this is a collaborative project with Eric Berglund, who's a photographer. And so Eric and I were, talking about these icons in our contemporary relationship to these icons, and the fact that like we actually can't necessarily distinguish where they're from or their kind of historical context, especially presented on sort of neutral gray backgrounds. They're really just disassociated images that look really great. And so we began messing around with the images, and one thing that we found, I often not only like to use ready-made images, but when I do use scripts or programs, I also like to use ready-made scripts and programs to figure out how they work. And one thing that we found was putting these images through Photoshop photo merge. Do you all know it? I mean, it's in Photoshop. It's when you take sort of a panorama and upload your panorama. It sort of stitches all of the images together and creates a panorama. Of course, in this case, it can't figure out where the images should go and what the panorama's like. So it just tries to deal with it as best it can, right? And starts blending things together. It actually changes colors of things to make them blend together in sort of. And so all of these images are just kind of randomly grouped. I just wrote a piece of software that grabs a bunch of images from the archive and feeds them to Photoshop and lets Photoshop stitch the images together. So it kind of creates these chimeric deities that are sort of no longer really grounded to a particular time or place. And the other, that one's funny. It does really funny things to space too. Like, you have the shadow, so this object is obviously sitting on something, but it's very easy to read as sort of standing on one leg. The other interesting thing then about when we start to think about scripted systems, or for me when I started thinking about this project and started thinking about scripted systems was, are scripted systems always necessarily algorithmic, right? Is that necessarily what I'm talking about? And it turns out that actually the only reason that this really works is because the Met is so consistent in its photography, right? The margins are always the same regardless of the size of the object. It occupies the same amount of space in the photograph. The lighting is so even, right? The backgrounds are so even, and it's precisely because of this kind of stylistic consistency that the software can then begin to really create these sort of surreal and completely absurd photo merges. So in a weird way, like it's because the system is so rationally constructed that it allows for this kind of strange confusion. Okay, so I put way too many of these in this slide. These are photographs from the show. One of the things that we decided to do was sort of keep this sort of weird trace of the algorithm in the way it stacks up the photos in the top left corner. So it always produced this strange margin and this kind of museum-style display with kind of dark walnut frames and spotlighting. That's sort of really what we were going for. So that's kind of that project, which led me to the ideas that I'm kind of currently working on, right? So this looks a lot like those images, well, maybe not a lot, but it does look like the images that we were looking at the beginning of the talk, which is coming back to the ideas of 3D modeling, right, from the two maps that I was showing, and playing around with this piece of software called 123D Catch. Has anybody heard of this? Yeah, most of you have. For those of you who haven't, in a nutshell, you take you take a bunch of photos of an object from as many angles as possible. You upload it to their servers, and it magically does its thing, and you get a 3D model out of it. Again, my instinct whenever I see sort of a nice completed representation is to crack it open and figure out how it's actually being put together. And it turns out that this is what the software does. Again, really similar. It cuts up the object and begins to lay them out in this way. So these are actually the texture maps. Again, these things that you're not meant to see. If you use 123D Catch, you're never really gonna see these. They're kind of hidden, they're not hidden, they're not sort of obfuscated, but you do have to dig around a little bit to find these. And then you can see how one scripted system cut up a particular object, and then how this would be used by a different scripted system to wrap around a 3D model to give you the kind of representation of the 3D model. Does that kind of make sense? Yeah, okay. The other thing that I found really strange about this or uncanny was my reading of them, right? So that's always like, have you all heard of Peridolia? It's a little bit like the Jesus Christ, maybe not on a veil, but on like a piece of toast, or bunnies in the clouds, right? It's when meaning is projected onto something by the viewer. And so I became really interested in misreading these images, right? What was the reading that I would project into them as a set? And you know, I just found them uncannily close to the archaeologist's table, right? When an archaeologist finds, I mean, you almost see, do I have a good example? I don't have a good example, but you almost see some of these at the Met, typically with pottery, right? And they're like the pot shards are all broken up, or a piece of wall that's been broken apart, and there's this attempt at sort of assembling it back together. So I thought it'd be a great idea to kind of work with that ambiguity and sort of push on that. So I approached the Met and asked them if they would let me sort of go crazy in their archives, or in their museum, which they didn't let me go crazy, but they definitely let me sort of work there for about 6 months, which was really great. So I got to run around the Met and photograph some of the objects in their collections and produce these 3D models. And so that led to, okay, well, the colors, weird. But anyway, so that led to the last show I had, where I was playing around with a lot of these ideas. So really producing 3D models, extracting the texture maps, printing them to scale, right? To some kind of scale. It's all of these individual pieces are actually kind of distorted relative to each other. So trying to approximate, you know, what, say this guy's tooth right here, the eye right there, what scale that would actually be if you went to the museum. And then also playing with actually printing out some of the 3D shards, because the model itself is also built, here I think there's a better, there we go. The model itself is kind of composed of shards and bits and pieces that are then assembled together. So also printing out the kind of blank models and the different shards. And then playing with the slippage between all of these different components, right? So you've got bits of the texture map, bits of the shard, and then the actual computer code that all this stuff is actually really the form that it takes, right? That underlies it all. So yeah, and these are just some more of the images from the show. And then, so the next sort of last piece of the puzzle is sort of going back and thinking about where these images came from and how they're typically actually used. And what's really funny is this happens all the time with kind of new software. Everybody wants to just use it to see what the software does, not necessarily paying attention to what the content is that they're, say, photographing or 3D modeling. So if you go onto the 123D Catch website, there's thousands and thousands of models that people upload. The other thing is the privacy settings on the app. By default, if you make a 3D model, say on your phone or using their web interface, by default it's made public. So you have to like check the box for it not to be public. So there's a ton of just really random, weird, contemporary ephemera on the site that I thought absolutely fascinating. You know, nobody would really upload a cup o' noodle to some web service, I don't think, but the fact that they're actually more interested in the software, they're not actually thinking of the cup o' noodle, or you know, of sort of the, this is an engine part, it's a motor, I guess, or you know, a banana, just like somebody just shot a banana. The other day I was on there and somebody was obviously learning how to use it, and there was like a sequence of 20 grilled cheese sandwiches. I mean, it was the same grilled cheese, but he was sort of learning how to use the software. And I think there's something really fascinating about that. Like again, in this intentional misread, I've sort of dubbed these the Midden. And in archaeology, like an archaeologist's sort of like biggest wish is actually to find trash piles, ancient trash piles, because that's where the most information is about daily life, right? What kind of stuff broke? What kind of stuff did people throw away? So that the altars and palaces and all that stuff is great, but if you really want to know what people are doing in their day-to-day lives, you look through the trash. You look through what's called Midden heaps. And so I kind of see this whole archive as this kind of giant Midden heap where all of this contemporary ephemera is being sort of recorded in 3D and cut up and filtered in these different ways. So that's that. I'll jump back and forth. Oh. So that's this project here, which is in progress. I mean, I kind of have no idea exactly what I'm going to be doing with it, but this is a site that I built that every time you go onto the site, it actually searches. I sort of reverse engineered their public database, again, kind of like the Nokia thing. So I figured out how they store all of this stuff online. Oh, that one looks kind of interesting. And so whenever you visit this site, it just grabs one of these images that hasn't yet been viewed by any human, right? So we're probably the first humans to kind of view this image. And then just playing around again back to these ideas of archiving or of whether humans will see any of these and where these belong. If no human ever sees them, are they really sort of some kind of aesthetic experience? Maybe not, so they belong in the world of sort of automated machine archives. But maybe once we've seen them, it's now sort of changed the status of this image. It's maybe actually turned it into what we might traditionally call an image. And if that's the case, then maybe this should be archived as an image. So I use Twitter, this automatically posts to Twitter, to archive these in the Library of Congress. Because all of Twitter, as you may or may not know, is actually archived by the Library of Congress since 2006, I think. I mean, they started doing it in 2010, but they got the back archive of Twitter. So all of your posts are now going to be in the records for future generations of scholars who will find out. And just to give you a sense, we can actually go look at the 3D model. For those of you who haven't seen 123D Catch, if it loads.
Is it pulling from the most recent thing posted, or is
I'm
it
pulling purely randomly.
Okay.
Yeah. Whoa, that one's crazy. Wow. So maybe mountains of some sort. I don't know. We can try another one. Takes a while. Anyway, we can come back to it. Oh, there it is. Oh, that's somebody's desk, it looks like, or room, right? Shelves or something.
Are there any implications from Autodesk? Like, have they complained or?
No, well, they haven't seen this yet, but they don't. I mean, they know about my work, and so far they've been fine with it.
I mean, it's a nice free advertisement for them, right?
Kind of. Yeah, I actually typically when I talk about this stuff, I mean, I'm being really informal right now, but in like my official lecture, I always like talk about scripted systems or software apparatus, and I try not to name any of them, which is they're super recognizable though. And the Google Earth one says like Google Earth in really big on it, but I do try and sort of not. Okay, so yeah, so that's what I'm currently working on, and then just want to finish up here with the different. Oh, yikes. Just a couple more sort of pieces to the puzzle, or maybe a couple more data sets that I'm looking at. The Smithsonian is actually now starting to make 3D models of objects from its collection. And same thing, sort of cracking open these 3D models, figuring out how the texture information is stored. and finding sort of really, what I find really intriguing, again, aesthetically intriguing imagery. This is the mammoth from the Natural History Museum. And what's happening here is that this isn't mapping the sort of surface color and surface texture, actually. It's mapping the surface, the lighting conditions on the surface. So they're lighting all of their models in this kind of blue sky room. We can actually go to the website, maybe. Oh, yikes. Well, we could if I knew how to use. Here, let me do it over here. Smithsonian. Okay, so is that gonna work? Yeah. So here's that project. Right. So this is actually what we're looking at, and they use this kind of really blue, super blue tinted light. Come on. There we go. To produce the 3D model, and so it turns out that when you again when you crack this open, I mean, literally it doesn't take that much. I just want to show you all what I spend most of my time doing is getting to a site like this, waiting for it to load. And then taking a look at what my computer's actually doing, and noticing that it's loading in a bunch of images like these, right? And that it's using these images to construct the 3D model. So this is the Wright flyer, the first airplane, which is kind of blown out in this image, but the wings are here. You can see the kind of tail wings there. And this is another part of the Wright flyer. These are all the engine parts. So again, kind of fascinated by my misread of this is sort of like a weird collection of objects, maybe. I don't know if you know the typographer Paul Elliman, who basically just collects objects and makes typographies out of that. And I actually gravitated towards these images because they looked so much like his work, that there was this pleasurable misread and something that's generated, again, not to be seen by humans, not for aesthetics at all, purely for function, and sort of pulling them out and displaying them that way. And then so the other part of all of this, yikes, can I pause that? Oh, the other part of this is thinking about, and this I'll show this video real quick that I made. So this video isn't so much a kind of work. I don't really think of it that way. It's much more just like a video essay where I wrote this with A.E. Benenson, who's a curator here in New York, and we were thinking about the kind of violence that's actually done to all of these objects, right? That this strange sort of, all of these objects are fractured in a weird way, really violently, again, because of our misread, literally fractured in the imagery. And if we draw a parallel, again, back to archaeology, typically time does that, or sort of inattention. We sort of cast something off and then it degrades. And there's something really interesting to me about this kind of reverse parallel, that it's actually a moment of intense attention that is breaking these objects digitally, right? It's exactly at the moment where we submit them to this kind of technical apparatus's gaze that these images are kind of transformed and corroded and corrupted. So we can watch a little bit of this movie, and then I'll throw the website back up.
Artifact is neither an object nor its representation, but the distance between the two. In this way, a digital artifact exists somewhere between the two dictionary definitions of its material predecessor. 1. Any object made by human beings, especially with a view to subsequent use. 2. A spurious observation or result arising from preparatory or investigative procedures. It is neither the object nor the observation, but the record of how a specific mode of observation has interfaced with an object and its context. The artifacts under consideration here were recovered from the community site maintained by the Autodesk software 123D Catch, which automates the process of translating user-submitted photographs of people, places, and things into three-dimensional models. The logic of digital conservation would seem to defend its sites against every material stress. 3D models are not eaten away by time or biology, and they are not worn down by use. Rather, they proliferate because of it. Still, most of these artifacts apparently bear signs of deterioration and decay. They are perforated, imbricated with debris, hollowed out, and broken into shards. Like the junk piles known as Middens to archaeologists, the 123D Catch site paradoxically conserves its objects at the moment of their fragmentation. But if a Midden grows out of cast-off objects, broken as they are discarded haphazardly as refuse, here the artifacts are fractured by the opposite force, not by intention but moment of intense technological attention. That is, what manifests as material distress is only the product of the specific features and limitations of 123D Catch's way of seeing. What 123D preserves, the artifact in question, is a field of technical vision. In other words, what 123D catches is itself. At this point, the archaeologist realizes that their normal method must be inverted entirely. The goal is no longer to piece together their fragments into an approximation of a whole, nor to keep digging to discover what might still be missing. Now the archaeologist must suspend the fragments as they are, understanding that what remains missing is already the discovery. What precisely can be recovered from the artifacts of this form of technical vision? Immediately we notice the technology's inability to distinguish between figure and ground, object and setting. This is revealed in two characteristic forms of debris: small indistinct shards orbiting the main object around all axes and larger semi-recognizable slivers agglomerated to the sides of the main object. The intrusion of the ground into figure catalyzes an ontological decomposition. As a cup melts into the table it lays upon, pieces of the furniture behind it, etc. Its relationship to its anthropocentric identity begins to dissipate. A single human legible object is overwritten by a constellation of algorithm-like highly motivated resemblances. Just as frequently, the artifacts suffer from arbitrary subtractions. Planes are popped with holes, and volumes are cut through by deep channels. The program's failure to render continuous surfaces often results from shadows cast by uneven lighting, an extension into 3 dimensions of the basic photographic problem of under-overexposure in high-contrast scenes. Tutorials for 123D Catch suggest photographing objects in flat, even lighting to minimize shadows. In other words, in order to accurately capture the dimensionality of an object, the program requires users to eliminate one of the most fundamental visual cues for the human perception of dimensionality. With the exception of relative size, shadows and shading typically provide the most information about depth, especially in static representations. A sculpture lit evenly against a uniform background may appear flatter than a painting of a sculpture with a convincing shadow. The means of approximating and reproducing a volume by the software is then diametrically opposed to its counterpart in human vision. 123D Catch requires its users to practice a particular kind of photography whose goal is to produce machine-readable information rather than anthropocentric resemblances. This distinguishes the process from its superficially similar predecessors in forensics and archaeology. These were earlier forms of so-called photogrammetry that attempted to create photographs containing the maximum amount of quantifiable measurements such as scale, color, and texture. While this practices instrumentalized photography as data, the data still only had to be legible to a subsequent human investigator or researcher. At the most schematic level, this mode of photogrammetry placed the technical apparatus of photography as a medium between two diachronic human subjects, the historical subject who created the artifact and the present or hypothetical future analytical subject. In the case of 123D Catch, the diagram is reversed. The human operator of the camera becomes the interlocutor for the communication between two technical subjects, the camera on the one hand, and the modeling software on the other. The technical logic of their subjectivity becomes the lingua franca that the human must learn how to speak. The 123D system re-educates the human subject on the meaning and use of photography. Put another way, if those features in these 3D models that appear to the human viewer as mistakes are most easily attributed to the system, they might just as accurately be redefined as errors made by the human in comprehending the new definition of photography.
And there you have it. So I'll just end back where we started, hopefully.
Do you roll 3D models from 123 Catch through the inspector and the browser, or more complicated than that?
123. Well, 123D Catch is. Here I can. You can literally just go online and where's the gallery? 3D models. So they have this sort of online gallery. This one's a little more complicated through the inspector. It actually doesn't show you all the files. I had to do a little more reverse engineering to automatically pull them online, because they've created their own. It's basically not pulling anything up through here, and it's very obfuscated and crazy and complicated. But yeah.
You can just download the models as whole.
Yeah, you can just download them. I mean, you got to sign in, and yeah, you can edit and download them. If this one eventually loads, we could take Konrad Zielinski's model and just play with it. So yeah, that video was all just models that I grabbed. I didn't make any of the models in the video. Yeah. Yeah.
And how easy is it with software that are constantly being updated?
Yeah, proprietary software. I mean, yeah, that's a really well. I mean, in general, it's a really big challenge, but I'm specifically interested in that aspect of it. So, like with the postcards from Google Earth, for example, I actually have my computer retake all the screenshots that I've already taken about once a month to see at what moment they change. So if you actually, I haven't. Maybe that's like a future show or something, but if you look online, because a lot of these images sort of proliferate online, like word gets around, and I post them all. I mean, I tend to post a lot of my imagery online because I love the idea of it circulating. If you kind of pay close attention, that Niagara Falls one, it's been written about in all these different art, and it's always actually a slightly different version of that image, which I find kind of amazing and great. So that's actually part of it for me, is sort of the way I think about all these systems are black boxes, or these kind of apparatus in which there's an input and an output. And my only means of gleaning what's actually in this black box is sort of poking at it. And the update cycle is part of that, right? The update cycle is another one of these conditions, very contemporary conditions that I like sort of problematizing, I guess. So I'm almost kind of glad when this stuff updates and breaks in a weird way. I mean, not glad, but it's just part. It's part of it to me. It's sort of a a part of it that I mean, I'm glad you asked that question. It's a part of it that we typically sort of overlook, or we think, oh, this will always be accessible. It's online. It'll always be there. But it's actually not. It's specifically not true that this stuff always has to be sort of re-performed and performed in the really big sense of the word, performed by computers in order to have any meaning. And that becomes, I mean, sort of digressing here, but it becomes really interesting in sort of places like Rhizome or the MoMA, who now have digital conservators, who can't open images or software created on, say, the previous versions of Macs. And they have to have emulators, and it becomes this whole technical struggle in order to just view an image that we thought, oh, that'll always be around. It's digital now, it'll always be around.
Yeah, somehow it seems to me that the pieces are like never ending, right?
Mm-hmm.
It gets updated constantly, and you could do like one 3D touch and then the next software that will
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, again, I see a lot of these just as ongoing collections, and then to be perfectly honest, sometimes it just has to do with maybe attention and boredom, which is what how a lot of these things work anyway, and so I maybe indulge that a little bit and think, okay, well, when I sort of get bored with one collection, I can leave it alone for a little bit and then come back to it. But yeah, no, you're right. I don't see any of these things as sort of finite in any way. And I also, really like, I didn't show too much of it here, but in a lot of my work, say the postcards from Google Earth, I keep playing with the way in which they're displayed. So, so I didn't show too much of this because I wanted to more talk about the stuff I'm working on now. But so you saw those postcards, but I also then play with them three-dimensionally, sort of print them on canvas. So that's another way where I'm just constantly, I don't see these things as finite series. I just keep playing with the imagery and playing with its methods of distribution. What I'm working on right now, for example, for the postcards from Google Earth, which totally isn't ready at all, but is to have the whole thing sort of exist as its own entity almost that takes no interaction from my part to distribute itself and show itself in institutions. So there's going to be some kind of online automated form that generates, that basically generates a zip package that institutions can download and produce these and sort of stick these postcards in exhibitions. And I think it's kind of really funny in a really dumb way that the postcards would almost show themselves, and I wouldn't even be credited as the kind of photographer or artist anymore. I think that would be fascinating. That it's just like this algorithm, and we're showing it in this fine art institution. Would be interesting. So I kind of do the same thing, right? I just kind of keep going along with it, or this is just something else that's another maybe sort of iteration of it. This is a show that's up right now. Oh no, I want the website. I think it's xpogallery.com. So this is kind of an interesting curatorial premise. They installed this show and then shut down the gallery, so nobody can actually go into the gallery. But they stuck a bunch of webcams inside the gallery, so the only way to access this show is through the web. And so this was my contribution, which looks exactly like one of the images that I've found. But they also have some behind the scenes shots. So this is the webcam. It's live right now in this inaccessible gallery. We'll see if this loads. This is actually how I'm producing that illusion. So I had them, I sort of sawed up a table and sort of bricolaged it so that if you sort of look right here, the webcam that we're looking at is actually just a zoom of this larger object that's kind of mimicking the technology in a weird way. So that's what I do. I just keep, none of it's ever finished. It's always just ongoing, updating. It's my update cycle. guess. Yeah. That was it. So questions.
What do you mean by finished? They're not finished? In what sense?
Well, I never sort of like think of, I don't maybe work in, maybe I was referring to the previous question. I don't work in sort of like a series that I then think, oh, okay, that series is done, over, move on to the next one. I just keep delving with the same imagery over and over and over again and figuring out different ways to maybe manifest it materially or distribute it online. I think that's the phase that I'm in right now with this Twitter thing, that again, I'm not really sure what I'm doing with it, but I think it's fascinating to begin to archive these in the Library of Congress in some weird way. So, yeah. Does that make sense?
Yeah. I thought maybe you just want to create a cube instead of like three-dimensional. I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know the
maybe.
formal aspect of it. I thought maybe.
Oh, yeah, no.
Yeah, it's concept is like a river, like
Yeah.
ongoing.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think it's really interesting too how you're sort of becoming, like especially with packaging the Google postcards, you become like a facilitator for these machines to make images and then show them. Like I really like that a lot. I think it's super funny and it's super interesting. And I think the Twitter page is sort of with the Autodesk. There's something you're sort of removing yourself. You've created this thing and it's running.
Right.
And it's just in a loop, and it can go on forever and be generative forever, and you're sort of in the background, which I think is really cool. You're functioning more like the machine in that part. Like
Yeah.
how we would normally think of it.
Yeah.
I think it's pretty fascinating.
Yeah, and with that one, I mean, in particular, how can I go back to it? Yikes. In particular, with that one, I mean, one of the things that I'm really trying to figure out with all this, and it's sort of elusive and hard to grasp, but this really only generates a new image and posts it to Twitter when someone, not a bot, comes to the site.
You're
So
right.
it's always like the viewer becomes the third term where actually meaning happens. And
Right.
so you're right, it's not even me anymore, and it's not even this machine. It then really is you, right? Or like you're kind of left to have to deal with this in one form or another.
Yeah, it's really nice. And I like also, I get the impression, like again, with looking at the different ways you've done the postcard, is that every time you show this work or anytime you show any work, like you're changing your display of it constantly, which I think is also really fascinating. I mean, I think it really beautifully reflects the place where you're working or where you're getting your source material from, which is so fluid. It's complete disregard for these like iconic images, which is sort of going back to that project, right? That they're constantly in flux and they're constantly alive and moving. And I think there's something about the art world, or there's something about like an artist's sensibility that is resistant to that in
Right.
a way. You know what I mean? It's like, well, how will anyone know what you are? Or what is the thing that you're trying to
Right.
sell? And I think it's really great that is removed from the conversation.
Yeah.
Completely. In terms of collaboration, like when you were collaborating with the photographer for that, like how did that work? Like in terms of
That worked. Well, that project actually came about. It was really funny. I participated in this thing called an Art Hack Day. Maybe some of you have heard of it or not. Where they take a bunch of technologists and pair them with a bunch of artists. I'm not sure which.
was it the Rise
Side of
thing?
it.
The six.
Well, it's like 7 on 7,
7 on
but
7,
it wasn't 7 on 7. But it was something. It was a similar kind of thing. Less formalized. They just throw basically 60 people in a room, and are like, okay, now make a project. So that's kind of where we started. I kind of had the Met archive. Somebody there actually who worked at the Met helped me, like really facilitated the downloading of images programmatically. Jonathan Dehaan. And then with Eric, we were just, and it's one of these things where you're supposed to stay up really late and there's supposed to be stress. So we were just like looking at these images. We were looking actually at a lot of John Steziker.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right,
Do you guys
and
know his work?
do you,
Here, look him up.
yeah, he's pretty great. He's actually got a show up right now, but he's a pictures generation and does these great postcard juxtapositions, and we were looking at a lot of that. But I really didn't want to, do it myself. Like
Right.
that's, I really like sort of working when there's sort of this scripted system at play. And so I was just taking these images and like feeding them through everything I could think of, like every, I don't know, must have tried every Photoshop filter and every whatever, you know, just kind of force feeding all of these different systems, these images, and seeing what happened. So yeah, that's how that one came about. And then with Alex, the video, Alex is sort of a writer and curator, and you know, he's put me in some of his shows, I guess, and we have this ongoing conversation. And I just really wanted to do something together because I think he's a really good writer, and so yeah, when that video was actually commissioned by Rhizome, when Rhizome approached me, I was like, oh, Alex, we gotta do this together. So
That's great.
Yeah.
So it's a very collaborative practice that you have, be it with machine or person.
Yeah. I think it's I sort of like a fluid set of, I never try and sort of fix it down. Just take it as it goes.
I have one other question. Okay, does anybody else have questions that I can ask? Yeah,
After
go for
you.
it. Yeah, go ahead, please.
I'm just trying to understand the process, and I just have a question. I don't know if that's relevant or not, but my understanding was like this, all these images algorithm and going through these softwares, and they come out, and like you see this beautiful, almost like painting, you know, like it reminds me of like Miro, for example. And I'm just curious that you ever thought of kind of finding these fragments, or finding a kind of a new vocabulary or language for yourself. Like, for example, Miro was creating these things and have another dialogue, another layer. I'm just like,
Yeah, I mean that's I think my practice is much more. I don't know. I'm stuck in archaeological metaphors at the moment, obviously, but it's a lot more about unearthing. So I'm not. I'm actually not sort of actively trying to. I mean, again, I think I'm really questioning what might be called the creative act in kind of today's mediated worlds, and you know, like questioning the kind of necessity for it, and questioning whether that's still a sort of mode of cultural capital that is still very prevalent, especially if we think of online, just sort of like reblogging, it's always like, you know, it's always pointing back to something else, and then the task of the artist becomes maybe a kind of unearthing or a kind of paying attention to context, and so really I'm much more interested in not necessarily creating my own language, not creating something, but actually playing with the context for these images in these different archives. But yeah, no, I mean, I think that would be great, and I love the fact that you read Moreau into this. I mean, I think that's so great, and that's exactly what I'm interested in. Is yeah, exactly. Exactly, but I'm more interested in that coming from the viewer than coming from me. I'm just more interested in shifting the context to allow us to basically look at these slightly differently. Yeah.
Do you sort of see criticism as the end point of that? It seems like that video you showed was someone doing your work and a piece of critique.
Yeah, I mean that video I tried to make it clear, but that was not. I don't really consider that a work. To me, that was it was. Somebody asked me to write about my work, and I decided not to write about my work, but to make a video about my work, or about some of the things that I think about.
Where
So.
would you draw that line?
I would draw the line. Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say that video is didactic to a degree, right? I'm trying to make a point. I'm trying to tell you what I think about these things, and it's an interesting video. I like it, but it doesn't have a matter-of-factness or muteness that I would consider is maybe present in most of my other work. That's just a little bit more like, here it is, you deal with it. That video is like, I'm telling you this, and that. So it's maybe a different mode of.
Do you know Helen Martin?
Who?
Helen Martin.
No.
She has a very interesting video, similar sort of aesthetic to that, which kind of plays as an essay, but it's also absurdist at the same time. And I find that like boundary between works that aren't didactic enough to be criticism, but are sort of reflexive to be closer to criticism and art really very interesting.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean that a lot of that probably comes from Alex, the person I was sort of, we co-wrote the text together, because he's a curator who's much more interested in that sort of strange line between critique and work. So maybe that's where some of that is coming from.
I also think like part of this is like I've seen this work, I've had time with it, so, and I also, I mean, I have 123D Catch, like I've played with it, I'm sure maybe my model will end up on your Twitter someday. They're pretty terrible. I was like in my studio walking around like a sculpture of an owl, you know, same thing. I'm like 100% like, yes, this is me, I've done this. Somewhat embarrassed right now, but that's fine. But I think that part of what that video, what's interesting about that video is it does shed some light on the technical process. Like, if this is the first time you're ever seeing this, there's so much to wade through.
Yeah.
Like, the fact that this exists, A. B, like, how does it work? You know, C, like, the strange sort of aesthetic that it produced, you know. And I think that video is a smart way. Like, I feel like if I were just reading about your work, even supplemented with images, I don't know, I feel like when I was watching that video, I'm tuning out. Like, I'm really invested in what I'm looking at, and then I'm listening, and then I'm, like, not listening, and then, you know, and I think that's actually really nice, because some of the stuff you just have to see and you have to look at. And there's a real materiality to this, which is something with a lot of digital artifacting, you know, and thinking about, like, glitch work that people have done. This in particular, I mean, maybe because it is about skinning and, like, texture map, but it is so material to me. I'm really curious, one of my other questions was with the 3D printing, like, how was that, like, is that something you'll continue to do, or was that something you tried to do? And I was really interested in that.
Yeah, I'm actually really interested right now in that tension between image and object, or the let's call it the promise of 3D printing, the promise of sort of reproducibility, and the fact, you know, I think it's going to be confusing for a while, at least in terms of our language, what we mean when we're talking about an image and an object. Because I see 3D printing as it's just an image with a third dimension, but it's not an object in the way that we've thought of objectness, like philosophically or traditionally. At least, you know, we tend to think of objects maybe more as sort of standalone or self-contained, but the fact that we're going to have so many physical things that now sort of refer back to some kind of original or some kind of representation. I mean, it's going to be a weird sort of interesting time. So yeah, I'm definitely playing with that a lot. My studio right now is full of weird 3D prints.
I'm sure. It was the first thing
Which
I
is-
said, like, did you glue them back together? Like, of course, that would be like the first thing I would try to do. When
Yeah.
you fail, I would imagine. You know.
No, they
do they go back
fit.
together?
They
They
fit
fit?
perfectly. Yeah. They that you can reassemble that
So
model.
cool.
Yeah.
Okay, any other questions, guys? No? Okay, well, thank you very much, Clement, for being
Thank
here.
you.
Thank you, guys. Have a nice day. Enjoy. Go download 123D. I'm gonna put little notes now when I start doing